moving away from kind of investment funding into government funding, and obviously this is something that Canada is as a whole, is very famous for and has been very successful as a strategy, and BC in particular. And to welcome to the stage to lead off this panel is the lady who's responsible for, in many ways, for us being here in the first place. So I'd like to give a warm welcome to stage to the amazing Nancy Mott of the VEC. So Nancy, thank you very much for inviting us here, and thanks for, I'll lead you to your panel now.
Thank you very much. So we'll just get everybody up on the panel. I think Lance has disappeared, so we'll start without him. But I think I'm going to move to the chairs. I think it's going to be a bit easier for us to have a conversation there.
Maybe one more.
Oh, okay. Oh, I think it's...
Lance is coming too.
Yeah. Oh, right.
Oh,
one more?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
That's sure.
Lance can sit here.
That's okay. That's
Truth.
Okay. So maybe quickly what we can do is just introduce ourselves quickly while we wait for Lance. So I'm Nancy Mott from the Vancouver Economic Commission. We are the economic development agency for the City of Vancouver, and my particular file, oh, there's Lance, come on up, is digital entertainment and interactive. So I work with film, visual effects, animation, games, and VR, which is kind of tying in all those things. So we're very excited that PG Connects has come to Vancouver. We did a delegation to London for PG Connects in January, and it was a fantastic experience for our local companies. So we're here to talk about a bit more about governmental financing options for companies who are BC-based companies. This could also apply to international companies who set up companies here. And I would just like everybody to quickly just go down the line and do a quick introduction to themselves.
Thank you. Sorry for showing up late, but better late than never. My name is Lance Davis, and I've been consulting into the technology realm for over 25 years now, with a focus on video game development. And my services into the realm are in the area of virtual CFO services. And by that I mean I can fly into small, nascent, or medium-sized operations and provide them full service and help them to get ready to raise money, do their business plans, cash flows, and such things. So I've worked with just about everybody in town and have familiarity with just about every type of money there is.
Hi, my name is Alex Mendelev. I run a company out of Victoria, BC called TinyMob Games. We make mobile social games. We're about to launch a game for Steam as well. We were founded in 2013. We have raised $3 million to date in private capital, and we are a lucky current recipient of the CMF.
Which brings the conversation over to me. I'm Katherine Lee. I'm with Telefilm Canada. So Telefilm Canada is an agency with the Department of Canadian Heritage, and the unit that I work with administers the Canada Media Fund. So we're called the Canada Media Fund Program Administrator. That's why you see my title with the Canada Media Fund. But officially, I'm with Telefilm Canada. I'm a development analyst at this point. I also work with incoming clients as a coordinator, and we can set up pre-application consultations with you to work with you on your incoming funding applications to the fund.
Cool. I'm Eric Jordan. I'm the CEO of Codename Entertainment. We're a video game studio like Alex, based in Victoria. So we've got a strong Victoria representation on our panel. We are 15 people. We started out doing web games, Flash web games. There's still money in Flash. And we launched a game on Steam, our first game on Steam last year, which has done really well for us, stayed in the top 2% most played games on Steam. We have a deal with Congregate to publish our first mobile game, which actually is soft launched in Canada right now, but officially launched next week. So.
And if you come to the BC Vancouver booth, they have little cards to give out, right?
Oh yeah, we've got codes for free chess, free in-game goodies.
For goodies.
So.
That's awesome. Well, since Alex started the CMF conversation, I'd love to start with Katherine on that actual fund, because I know that there's a couple of ways that games companies can apply for some funding for that, correct?
Sure. Yeah. Can I just get an idea of anyone in the audience who does have some familiarity about applying to the Canada Media Fund? Yep. A few people. So it's an agency that has been set up by Canadian broadcasters, satellite providers, and they essentially have two different streams of funding. One is broadcast related, so that we have a television and often a digital media component combined. And the other stream that probably will be of most interest to people in the audience is called the experimental stream. Experimental, we have 3 stages of activity. We can fund you when your project is in what we call development, which is essentially concepting, prototyping, research, that type of pre-build activity. And the second type of activity that we fund is called production. And when you think of a waterfall model of building, it's typically the build stage where you have already gathered all your assets. You figured out, your market strategy, and you're working on building your project for launch. And the third stage we fund is called marketing, which is fairly self-explanatory. This year, we've just introduced a pilot program called the Commercial Pilot Program, and that is aimed at projects that have a high probability of commercial success in the marketplace. So what we have now is called innovation. That's our existing experimental development, production, marketing activity. And in our pilot commercial program, we fund production. So we still have a couple of deadlines in the fall. If anyone would like to get in touch with us and find out more about the programs, we're happy to discuss that. Should I get into the breakdown of funding,
Yeah, I mean,
the financing
it'd be great to know
structure?
maybe approximately the dollar figures for each of the 3 stages that they can expect.
Sure. So in innovation, in development, we're looking at a cap of $300,000 or 75% of your project's eligible costs. That's Canadian costs. So whichever amount is less. So you're looking at coming in, asking the CMF for up to 75% of funding for your development stage project, and then showing that you have 25% of funding that you have from other sources, whether it's your own investment, your sweat equity from the owners of the company, and so forth. The second stage of activity, production, we have a cap of 1.2 million. It also happens to be your per project cap. So if you happen to be successful at receiving funding for all 3 stages, you can only get at max 1.2 million for your entire development, production, marketing combined. So 1.2 million, you can spend it all in production if you want to. Again, it's a 75% or 1.2 million, whichever is less. And then when you come in for marketing, it will be a $400,000 cap or 75%, whichever is less. There are different recoupment models that are also attached to those. Should I touch on that too, or I'll let other people talk?
Yeah, we can move. But I'm curious, Alex, having gone through the process, do you have any advice for people on the application process? Because I know it can be quite a lot of heavy lifting and a lot of information.
Yeah, I mean, it's an onerous process to apply because the competition is pretty tight. There are a lot of people applying for the Canada Media Fund from all over Canada. And there's a limited amount of funds that are available and distributed every year. I believe for the experimental fund for last year was $40 million that was distributed. And so, my advice would be certainly start applying early. It took us, I think, we've applied 3 times. We were successful once this last time. And each time it probably took us about 3 weeks to do the application. And that's including weekends with multiple people. So it's not easy. The application focuses very heavily on innovation, and so you need to be very good at distilling and understanding what is really innovative about the game that you're about to make. and then be able to put it in a format where that's palatable to the people that are going to be judging your application. And like I said, it's very competitive. So definitely give yourself a lot of time. Two is they seem like big numbers, 1.2 million for production. If you've made mobile games before, you understand that $1 million is not a tremendous amount of money to make a mobile game. So keep that in mind in terms of the scope of your project. But also, if you're applying for a project where you're expecting that the CMF is going to give you $1 million, that means you need to provide 25% of those funds. So you need to be sitting on something like $310,000 at the time of the start of the project. So that's going to be important because they will check, and you will not get your funding until that happens.
Yeah, and so I believe it's comes to a bit of a point system. So when you're doing the application, depending on what you're submitting, you get points for your team. So you want to have a really strong team. You have to have a good business plan, a monetization plan. So there's a lot of things that you kind of have to think about, and it's really the CMF really gets you thinking so that you have a solid foundation actually for your business. So if you're using other forms of funding, it just is helpful for that. Is that right? Yeah. So also another thing. As part of the CMF application, you can actually use the interactive digital media tax credit as part of the money that you're putting into skin in the game. Lance, are you able to talk a little bit about that tax credit?
Thanks. Yeah, I don't think the nice thing about both of those programs in particular, Nancy, is you're not intended to stand alone. They're not silos necessarily. In fact, I think CMF welcomes other investment in you. It just goes to show the credence to your business plan and so on if you have other investors. The IDMTC is a great tax credit. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with it out there. How many people have applied for it and or received any funds? Not an overwhelming number, but good, some familiarity. It is administered by BC. At the moment, there is a cap on the funds. Eric and I are sitting on the public policy committee at DigiBC. We're lobbying for higher rates. We at DigiBC were responsible for bringing the credit in. But fundamentally, here's how it works. If you're into interactive product and there is a heavy emphasis on game, then you're fully qualified. And things in your office that might not qualify would only extend to administrative, marketing, those kinds of functions. So I think I find on average that we end up with about 80 to 85% of your labor spend qualifies. And the tax credit currently is 17.5%. So it's good money back. And you file it along with your corporate tax return. It gets peeled off upon submission and sent to a different division. In fact, that's film division at CRA that administers it right now. And those people aspire to, if you can get it in with your tax return, about 120-day turnaround. So keep that in mind, okay? And on the side, without revealing too much, we have been lobbying quite heavily. We've had a lot of great conversations, and I'm pleased to say good reception from the province lately about possibly extending that credit and maybe even raising the rent. Fingers crossed, or the rate, sorry. It's not rent, but good things coming forward, right?
That's great. So, Eric, you have used the IDM tax credit in
Absolutely,
in
yeah,
the past?
absolutely, yeah. It's a great program. If you are going to file for it, little sort of thing to know is like between the time that you finish your year end and before you actually file, you want to submit because you need approval from the Ministry of Finance saying that you actually have like something that qualifies, so you actually make games or something like that. And if they haven't visited you, then sometimes they like to come out and check and make sure you're not making pornography or something like that. And so you want to make
big business.
Yeah. I don't think they need any tax credits in that industry. So you want to make sure that between you finishing your year end and you actually submitting your tax return that you've got that letter so that when you then submit your tax return, you can actually go and do the digital media tax credit piece. So like we had one year where we were like, getting ready to finish tax return, and KPMG, who we're working with, were like, do you have your letter? I'm like, yeah. So make sure you get that beforehand. But and you can like, Lance was saying, it's on specifically development-related expenses. I mean, the great thing is, unlike something like Shred, is that it's, not just sort of developers, but artists and sort of other people associated with that, producers. We allocate a fraction of our community management time into that and associated costs, as well as marketing. You want records and sort of things to support that, but basically things that still flow into your development decision making on your games is all allowable. So yeah, so it's a great credit. And unlike Shred, which we haven't kind of got into, but there's scientific research and experimental development. There's this test that goes on to make sure that what you're doing actually has some risk element, sort of as CRA would like to define risk. The digital media tax credit doesn't have that. Really, it's the only kind of audit piece. Once you've got the letter that says yes, you're actually doing something that's eligible, the only kind of review audit piece that comes up is like, well, were these people in BC at this particular time? So we've had to track down sort of cable bills for co-ops who worked at us with a particular piece of time to say yeah, they were actually in BC. But so there's not the kind of well, were you really making a game or something like that? It's just proving that those expenses actually happened to those employees and they really received the money and they're really BC employees. And it doesn't apply to contractors. So if you're thinking about contractors versus employees.
I think it's great too. A message that I'm hearing also is that industry is highly engaging government because it's an ongoing process. You can't just kind of hope for the best and then kind of put your head down. You have to be active and you have to make sure that they understand the benefits to the government. And most of our tax credits are labor-based, so there's a job attached to it, and that's another incentive that the government has to keep these going. And also, you can use the IDM, can you not, for bridge financing with some of the banks? Is that kind of, Lance, have you come across that?
As with all things money, under certain conditions. It helps if you're a legacy filer, that is if you've been filing for more than 1 or 2 years. Then you have your profile and you prove that you are credible and that what you're doing, you know what you're doing. But yes, there are certain lenders, and who comes to mind foremost is the Royal Bank. They cut their teeth into film funding. That model for underwriting the cost of films was actually underwritten here and created here in Vancouver many years ago. So they've graduated from that to their knowledge-based industries division, and they understand game development, they understand tax filings and credits. They used to partner with EDC. EDC would give them a guarantee and say, hey, Eric makes great games, we know that he's good for it, let's underwrite. That is, and the way this would work, for instance, you're halfway through your next year, you haven't filed yet, but you've got 2 years or 3 years of filing behind you with a profile. Let's say you traditionally get a $100,000 tax credit back, cash in hand. If you're halfway through the fourth year, the next year, you might be eligible for $50,000, but you've not yet filed. They'll bring in a third party, someone like myself maybe, who will assess you and say, yep, the spend's been made, everything looks good, and then they'll actually lend you against that as you go. So you've got valuable working capital. You can hire up people, you can underwrite your project as you go. And then when you file, of course, you'll have to repay it back to the bank, but you've got the use of the money now rather than later. That'll, of course, always come with a cost. Be fussed about who you talk to. There are a couple of private firms in town that will underwrite it. Espresso Capital, I know, is one. But there are more jumping into the fray because they're beginning to understand it and it's more of a commonplace thing.
That's great. So talking about payments and recuperating, why don't we talk about a little bit what the CMF, their expectations are as far as, oh, sorry.
Well, do you want to talk a little bit more? So I think a critical part of digital media tax credit is and we haven't talked about Shred yet, but so there's two kind of elements that are going to happen for BC companies, is that if you will have a choice, you can take federal Shred money, and then for the province, you can either take matching Shred or you can take digital media tax credit. You can't do both for whatever reason, but you can't do both.
Should we say what Shred stands for? Does everybody know what Shred stands for?
Scientific research and experimental development.
Yeah.
Right? So yeah, so you can take one or the other, and depending on kind of what you're doing and where your flow of
Is this
investment
kind of cutting edge? Do you have to be doing something different to get shred then, or?
Yeah, well, it has to be what as I sort of alluded to, CRA considers experimental development, which may not be the same. Well, it's not the same bar as like publishing an academic paper on that. But another angle I was just going to sort of then lead over to Alex is that if you take money through the EBC, so you take venture capital money, then that means that you will not be able to take the BC component of digital media tax credit. You can't take BC shred, but you can take digital media tax.
Yeah, so there's a different program,
set of
which
logic
is
for that.
an EBC, Eligible Business Corporation program, which incentivizes BC-based investors to invest into BC-based companies. And if you're part of that program, which is a very easy application process, and the investor is part of that program through the VCC program, I think, then upon them placing capital into your company, they get 30% back on their tax return the following year, which is really valuable, right? And so that sounds amazing when you raise your round, but when you've spent your round on creating games or whatever it is you're creating, and you really want that tax credit, that 17.5% that you get with just saying that we make games, you don't get to have that if you're part of that program. So, I believe it's 5 years from the last time you've used it as an investment.
Yeah. So that's another thing what sort of Lance was talking about, sort of interfacing with governments and sort of talking about this is another thing that we've been discussing about, how do we rationalize those two programs together? So
it's an egregious term, which really doesn't belong. And they've kind of admitted that to me off the record. Right. So, yeah, it shouldn't belong. And as we discuss these programs, there are going to be little nuances to them, right? The recoupment, for instance, could get in the way of a shred claim depending on what the terms of recoupment are. As long as it's actually defined as repayable, and I see really good progression towards really well defining that. It allows the feds what they call stacking provisions. So let's say you have some IDMTC, some federal shred, some CMF, some IRAP, some NRC. Good for you, right? But how does this all stack up so that you're not double dipping? And they'll actually carve away the fundamental claim for the elements of those other pieces of funding that actually overlap. And there is a way to do it. Don't be afraid of it. But you do need to talk to your accountant and your tax advisors a little bit on this one just to make sure that everything is lining up nicely. But there is a way to do it. That's the good news.
So can we talk about this CMF and what the expectations are?
Sure. The CMF funding is dispersed as recoupable, so it's all repayable. The development financing is attached to recoupable advance. So say, for instance, you do your prototyping and then you decide not to come back to the CMF, or you're not successful at getting production financing, then you enter production with a different set of financiers. That development financing that you get from CMF is repayable on the first day of the start of production. However, the advance can be rolled over into your production financing. Say you're successful in coming to the CMF for production financing and you're rewarded funding for that. Then what the production financing terms is called recoupable investment. So the CMF will recoup the full amount of its original investment in your project, and it will participate in profit from sales. So there's no IP ownership in terms of the CMF taking any ownership of the company or of the project itself. It only participates at a percentage of what it has participated in terms of the financing into the project. So it breaks down depending on, I can get into the details, but it's all online. And I can answer questions later as well. But so you can take a percentage off of the gross sales for your expenses. Of course, there will be marketing expenses, your web-based expenses, your personnel, and so forth. And the CMF will look at participating in the profit, sharing the profit that's left over from those amounts. In marketing, what happens is the CMF participates in a recoupable loan again. So once you pay back the full amount of the original input that the CMF has into your marketing financing structure, then you're done. There's no profit participation attached to that. I should also add that there's a 7-year expiry period. So say, for instance, hopefully your sales take off like a rocket, but, say, for instance, you don't manage to pay back the CMF within that 7-year span, then it's gone into the ether. So there are did I say there are no interest terms attached to it, aside from that profit participation within the production financing.
And it's great too that the CMF does pre-application consultations for people who want a bit more information. So that's really helpful, making sure you're getting as much information in the application as possible.
Yeah, we're happy to look at, say, for instance, we wouldn't be able to steer you in terms of your creative material. We can talk about whether or not it is eligible and raise any, potential sticky areas. If you have particular financing that you want to put together and you want to see how that affects your recoupment, we're happy to set you up and, talk with you through that so that you know what you're coming in with, and your other investors also know what's happening and what's expected in terms of repayment.
And has anybody used the IRAP program? Should we talk about that? Eric, do you want to talk about how that worked for you? So that's the Industrial Research Assistant Program.
Yeah, so that's one of the federal bodies. So National Research Council, NRC, runs the IRAP program. Within that, we've used it, I guess, sort of two things within IRAP. One is they'll help fund the sort of experimental stuff that you're working on, or things that are adding kind of unique sets of talent into the business. So, I mean, we've done a couple of smaller ones, so smaller being like $20,000, $30,000 each of them. The amount of paperwork you have to go through sort of tracks to how much it is, and so at the $20,000, $30,000, it's a relatively simple and pretty light process. As you move up, it becomes a lot more, so we sort of stayed in that. They also have this program that not everyone knows about, which is a fantastic program called the youth program. They call it like Y projects. And so what that is it provides, it's a different amount of money each year depending on kind of what their budget allocation is. I think this year it's $17,000 or $17,500 to help you in hiring a recent grad. The interesting thing about it is even though it's NRC and dominantly kind of programming and development sort of focused, the Y program, as long as you are an NRC client, and anyone making games would be an NRC client, the Y program can be used for any position that you would hire. So it could be used for an executive assistant, it could be used for an artist, it could be used for a community manager. Actually, we've used it twice, once for a community manager and once for an artist. The trick is they have to have graduated from a legitimate program, so it has to be a post-secondary program that's actually like a real program that's related to what you're hiring them for. So if you're hiring an artist and they just graduated with a writing degree, that wouldn't work. But we hired an artist graduating with an art degree, and that worked. So that's a great program, and it's like I say, it's $17,500.
And MyTax is a bit different, right? There's a MyTax program for master's students.
I don't think it's for hiring. We did a MyTax one with a UVic prof. Right? It was specifically around a project, and basically, from our perspective, we ended up getting labor. So right. we found a prof at UVic, and we worked with them. They actually did all the filing, so we didn't have to deal with all that.
Okay. All right.
And there's a student who worked with us. It's similar. There's a different thing called. So INSERC has a program called USERA. It's undergraduate student, or it's the Industrial Undergraduate Student Research Award, and it's $4,500, and it's towards co-ops and stuff like that. And then they've also got an Engage grant through INSERC.
So again, everything seems to be labor-based. It's kind of building the talent pool, and I think that's that's a really good thing to
Right,
do
yeah.
to support that. It's something that we work really hard on, trying to make sure that people know that there's jobs, that going to the high schools, things like that. So,
Well, yeah, and there's a lot of focus between like post-secondary and trying to collaborate, like trying to incentivize industry to collaborate with
no,
post-secondary.
exactly. So, as far as there's one more fund that I've heard that's quite good is the Creative BC Interactive Fund, and that was one you can get up to $50,000 for working on prototypes and things like that. Has anyone used the Creative BC Fund at all? Yeah. Okay. And that worked okay.
Yeah, so they do that. They help you fund some development or interactive projects, but they also help you go to conferences.
The Passport to Markets.
The Passport to Markets, yeah. So that's how we use them. And so what they do is they have a schedule of industry events, kind of worldwide, that they support. And then if you want to go to those events, that you apply, and then they will fund a portion of your trip, including travel and kind of hotel stay.
Admin, yeah.
And it's usually up to $1,500 that they will fund. So.
Right, and Government Affairs Canada also just announced that too. So you can also there's a fund where you can apply for doing collateral, travel, things like that to get into different markets. So
Correct, yeah.
that's good that we're in that.
In terms of going to conferences, there's a Canada BC jobs grant that you can also use. So I got like our GDC tickets this year and stuff. We got money. I think it doesn't cover T&E, but it covers 3/4, I think, or 2/3 of your actual admission for the conference.
No, that's great. That's great. So I have a question for you, Lance, about somebody who's starting out a company. So either they've wanting to start a company, or maybe come from another country, want to start a small company. What are the funds that you recommend first? Because obviously there's so many, and they don't always apply to start, say, a startup situation.
Okay, that's a good question. That's a very good question, because the ones that we've been talking about, all pretty much, with the exception of these last few, are predicated on you having incurred your labor costs. So it's implicit in there that somehow or other you paid for all that. So now you're about to open your doors, and that's a whole different scenario. The venture capital fund would be a good one if you have connections and you know you're opening your studio. People that might be interested in you because, for instance, you have a valuable IP or something that would attract them. I think that would be a great one. There's a little bit of an unsung hero in the background here too. We talk about all these institutional funds and so on and applications that you need to make. But from the day you open your door, you're going to need to know your banker. And so many people take the bank for granted. And you're going to run your payroll through them and your various expenses and so on. And hopefully, too, as you sign contracts and you raise revenues, you'll be funneling those through the bank. And they honestly do have a very serious interest in you and your profile. And something that I tell people is, it sounds a little unusual, but you should get to know your banker. And as a technically oriented company, you should go through the knowledge-based or technology division of the head branch of a bank. Don't waste too much time at a branch bank. They're lovely people, but they don't understand business. And so you would go to the head office branch and introduce yourself to the technology side of them and just tell them that you're going to be making shred claims and you're going to be doing IRAP applications and such things, and that you might need a line one day. And sure, that's far off in the future, but if you meet these people, and I always say to people, if you don't know the name of your bank manager, your branch manager, there's something wrong. You should know them. You should be able to send them an email, say hi, or just ask questions about financing. They can sometimes get very creative with you. And they might be the ones who call you one day and say, we've been watching you for the last 6 months, 8 months or whatever. Things seem very solid over there. We have this program with EDC. We might be able to couple up with them and help you. So don't forget the bank manager side of it, right? The rest of the programs, yeah, much predicated on spending already in advance. But know from the day that you start, you're qualified, right? And they all, by the way, we talked about it, we alluded to it. Every single one of them has great websites. We don't necessarily love CRA, but they try really hard. I've just spent some time with them several times over the last 3 months, and they want to give you shred money. And they run seminars, and they do have webinars, and you can ask them questions online, and you can get predetermination from them. And if you want, on an anonymous basis. The IDMTC folks, I've been spending a ton of time with them lately. And they're trying too. Unfortunately, they're a little bit overwhelmed. A lot of people don't know this. That division now reviews natural gas credits. So they had a small number of people, and now they're getting spread too thin.
Do they want to move it into Creative BC? Because Creative BC is focusing on games now, right?
Ask me after next week when we talk to some people. And I think there's a move afoot to streamline the process, because
Okay.
it is getting stuck and it's getting plugged.
Yeah, because it should be part of the entertainment side.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I know. So, Katherine, I have a question for you about VR, because we're seeing a lot of the rise of VR. Are you seeing more VR companies applying for CMF, and are they part of the innovation side, or are they part of the commercial side?
Yeah, definitely. We are, in the last couple of years, we are seeing VR proposals coming in through the doors, and it's really exciting. I mean, I sat in on the track 1 or track 2 panel, whichever one was in the other room, talking about the future of VR, looking at the challenges, and we're very interested to follow that type of innovation. Innovation is topmost in terms of, as Alex was saying, in terms of the scoring. So when a project does come in through the doors, we look at an evaluation grid, and what we have now, we've set up a system so that when you get your decision, when the analysts have looked at it, when the jury has looked at it, then you get to look at the evaluation profile for your project. So you get the feedback in terms of, how well it ranked in terms of your team makeup, in terms of your experience, the history of your team, the innovation profile of your project, your business planning, your marketing and distribution revenue structure, that type of thing. How did I get here? I was talking about VR. So yes, we've been seeing VR across the country. Largely we've been looking at studios in Toronto and in Vancouver proposing VR projects. So, but it's coming through the door, and we'd like to see a lot more. It's an exciting development.
Great. And Lance, is the IDM tax credit, does that apply to VR or the other ones we spoke about?
Depends. They're very hung up on the game element side. This is a nice segue, though. I would say cautiously, yes, it can certainly qualify. And again, if you're not clear about it and you're wondering, you can actually reach out to them online and ask the people in the IDMTC department. The segue here is, at one time, I think Bob Wong was a potential member of the panel, and he wasn't able to be here, Creative BC. Now, I don't administer much in the way of film tax credits, but our very good friends in that realm, i.e. through Bob, asked me to reach out to you. And if you are in the VR space, the film credits can be available to you. And he wants to hear from you, and he's available. And he said, if you're just not sure, call me and ask me, which is kind of a nice gesture, I think. But as you may or may not be aware, those are very generous credits. So if you're in VR, anyway attached to film perhaps, providing some kind of effects, get on to those guys right away, because that's a very nice rate.
Okay, all right, great. I guess we only have 2 minutes left, so I thought maybe we should open it up for questions. If anybody has any questions. Yes?
In relation to Shred, you mentioned a couple minutes ago pre-determination. Is that a new thing?
It's actually been around for a short while. It's been around for a few years. They are stepping it up, though. They're making a move to advance those seminars. And per a discussion that I had only yesterday with CRA, watch the online site for what it tells you will qualify and how you file and so on. They're going to split it out into separate segments so it's even more streamlined. But take advantage of it, absolutely.
Yeah, over there.
Is there a minimum spend threshold for the tax credit? And also, in conjunction with that, when you apply for it, are you given provisional approval, or do you take that certificate and say, yes, you've been approved for it for when you file the tax?
Real quickly, so in the context of the IDMTC, the BC Digital Tax Credit, $100,000 is the minimum spend. And right now there's a criteria that it must be your principal business, as my good friend alluded to. But here's a little tidbit. If you're ready to file and you haven't done your homework and you haven't got your registration number, the guys in Victoria tell me to fill in lieu of the number BC 00000 and file anyways. At least your taxes and any shred that you might have will be going through process. And while the guys in Victoria are deliberating and getting ready to give you your reg number, as soon as you get it, you can literally phone it in to CRA. And they also, too, notify CRA right away so that the rest of your return can get handled.
What's the code again?
BC triple zero, or BC quintuple zero. Yeah. Yeah, and CRA will go, what the hell is that? We can't process this. But they're processing the rest of it because it could hold up your shred. Shred, unfortunately, goes to one department, and IDMTC goes to another. And CRA is working on that as well. But unfortunately, I've had clients with 7-figure shred claims held up by the fact that the IDMTC is not ready yet. And that's horrific. That can be horrible. So easy to avoid.
Anybody else? One more?
Yeah, so the media fund, there's a bias obviously towards a team, and as you were saying earlier, someone said about having a strong team. Well, what if you're a one-man development shop, and you're saying, okay, I'm also the designer of the game, I'm also composing music. What are your chances given that scenario?
Sure. We do see projects from new companies and small agile teams. Definitely, if you can demonstrate the type of experience, your own development history, point to any examples in your published titles list and that type of thing, that can show that you know how to build what you're proposing to build, and that you're able to manage the level of budget that you're proposing as well. So we look at, your timeline for your build. So is that realistic? There are a number of factors that we look at. So, your relative experience, your own history with, what you've delivered in the past. You may have worked for a AAA company in the past and then you've decided to come out on your own. That's fine as well. We take that all into account.
And for smaller teams, the Creative BC Interactive Fund up to $50,000 is a really good place to start. So thank you all very much. Hopefully we'll see you at the shindig tonight, and maybe if you have any more questions, we can answer them then.